All right, I'd like to welcome everyone who's with us today. We are in the great city of Enterprise. Thank you for joining us, and for those that are joining us on video as well, I'd like to open the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting for August 17th. And first on the agenda, we have an update on House Bill 2017, and it's a good day in Oregon for transportation funding, and Ms. Leah, you have been very, very busy in helping guide and shepherd forward House Bill 2017. You're going to give us a presentation on some of the deliverables there and the bill in general. So please.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Leah Horner, Government Relations Manager. And I first want to apologize for not being at the Commission meeting last month, where kind of the kickoff of the overview of House Bill 2017 occurred, but it's one of those sorry not sorry because I was on the beach of Waikiki. So I am pleased to be here with you today, and I'm going to kind of walk through the implementation that we're working on for House Bill 2017. I'm going to start kind of big picture and then kind of hone that in a little bit, but feel free to stop me at any point if there's questions. So I think kind of my mantra since the bill passed the House and the Senate, and I'm sure folks in our office are tired of me saying this, is that the bill has not yet been signed by the governor. And so just to kind of set that as a very clear expectation, I don't think we're calling that into question, but I just want folks to be aware that once the bill is signed, it is not effective until 91 days after sine die. So I expect that the bill will be signed, and then it will not be actually effective until October 6th. And we've counted the days on the calendar a number of times, so we're very clear that that's the actual date. So in some of the documents that we'll kind of go through in a few minutes, you'll see that that's kind of where our starting point is. Taking that into consideration, and despite, my, slight heart palpitations when Senate and committee appointments came out and the Joint Committee was not listed on there, they did that on purpose, also because the bill is not into effect until October. So the legislature will be convening in September for interim days. We do not expect to hear anything from the Joint Committee since they're not appointed. It's yet to be determined whether or not the transportation committees will want to hear something. My guess is not, but that's kind of on the back burner still, trying to figure that out. So then the committee will be appointed in October, and then I expect to have them convene during November interim days, and then probably again in January, and then obviously leading into the February session. So that's kind of where we are at with the Joint Committee and kind of the overarching implementation piece. But as I'm sure you are aware, it's one of those gray areas right now because we don't want to go and then not go. We don't want to go too fast. We don't want to go too slow. We don't want to be asked for an update on where we're at in November and not have anything to report back on, especially given some of the large expectations that are coming forward in February for us. So you'll also notice, and I think there's been conversations that what we are teeing up at this particular moment in time is anything that we can leading up to that go live date, for lack of a better term, to make sure that everything is teed up, but nothing is at a point where it could not be pulled back if needed. So we're paying very close attention to that as well. So once the bill did pass, one of the things that we realized pretty early on is that we needed a project manager to kind of help us with the implementation, to help guide the ship. And the way that I've been kind of talking about this, right, wrong, or indifferent, is that we have a very large bill that has a lot of black and white requirements in it. There are still some gray areas around, legislative intent, around conversations that transpired at the beginning of the conversation that may not have been codified at the end of the conversation. And so really kind of making sure that there is the appropriate political lens as we're moving forward with implementation, and making sure that nothing is falling through the cracks, that we have clearly identified timelines, because it's not just a report due February 1st, it's all of the legwork leading up to that. It's making sure that we have appropriately identified the leads on particular elements within the bill, making sure that we have roles and responsibilities clearly identified, making sure that divisions are working cross-divisionally together. And not that I don't think any of this wouldn't happen otherwise, but just being able for us to have a centralized location where we can kind of see, the start to finish kind of components, and then be able to hone in on details as we need to. So since there's been a void of a project manager, and I think as was mentioned a bit ago, I've chatted with I think 14 people as of late to make sure that we have the right fit kind of helping with this. But because we don't have anybody, it's given me the opportunity to play with a number of tools, and I have no project management background other than watching them be done successfully. But one of the documents that you have in front of you is this handy-dandy, ginormous chart. And what we've done is tried to really piece out the high-level components of implementation over the next 6 months. So I feel like that's one leg of our charge. And we've identified responsible parties. The blue square kind of identifies when the due date is for each of these items. And kind of tried to work things backwards just a little bit so that we could make sure that everything that's appropriately needing to be done is plugged in here. The other elements that are reflected on this sheet are items that we also got money for. As a result of House Bill 2017, they ran the budget separately through House Bill 5045, but they did give us startup money, if you will, to kind of make sure that we did have resources to move forward with the charge over the next 6 months. So the elements that we did get funding for are also in here. If you're paying very close attention, you'll note that there's one element in here that's not due until 2023 that we got funding for. I'm not quite sure why, but that's also reflected in here, but it's a little bit of a one-off on there. So this, at this particular moment, is kind of our starting document. I expect this to morph significantly as we look at implementation over both this biennium and next biennium. The second piece of our charge at this point in time that I see as a significant lift is also the fact that because we only got funding for the first 6 months, we will be going back to the legislature in February asking for the remainder of the fiscal that we need to make sure that this is implemented effectively. And so my team in government relations right now is working with divisions to make sure that the numbers that we had estimated at the end of the 17 session are really dusted off, and appropriate fiscals and FTE requests that we will bring forward for this biennium and next. We'll be working internally to make sure that we have scrubbed those and make sure that we have the right levels, the right people, the right kind of execution on this, looking a little bit more long term. We're still waiting on details on kind of timeline around that. I'm sure we will be having another conversation about what that looks like. My expectation is that we'll need to have final numbers scrubbed by late fall to make sure that we're in time for the budget conversations that tee themselves up fairly early for the February session. So that's kind of where we're at with the fiscal piece right now. One other thing that I will kind of note, and I think that this work will also be folded into whatever project document we end up utilizing, is our work with external entities. And for us right now, that's kind of twofold. We've met with AOC and LOC. We will continue to do that. We're working on the roles and responsibilities, both in the short and long term, to make sure that, neither leg of the three-legged stool is wobbly, so that we're all moving forward, especially given some of the triggers that are put in place in the bill to make sure that we're all kind of moving forward unified on a number of elements. So we are working through that. And one other piece that I just thought I'd mention is that we are also working very, very closely with our sister agencies on this implementation. It's not just ODOT going out and making sure that we are doing this appropriately. Department of Revenue, as an example, has a number of components that are make or break in this to make sure that we are working with them in lockstep to deliver. So they're giving us the new taxes, and then we're spending them right. But if that delivery doesn't happen, so we continue to work on that relationship with them, as well as with DEQ and a number of the other agencies that are impacted by this. So we've still got a big lift ahead of us, but I will say, just from my personal perspective, that this is it's a really exciting thing to be working on implementing. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So, not to put you on the spot, but I will.
Okay.
And you can put him on the spot if you'd like. What keeps you awake? What do you worry about the most on getting done?
I think I'll answer that twofold. The thing that keeps me awake is what I had mentioned earlier about legislative intent. I think that things were moving so quickly that there may be some components of this that people think should be executed in such a manner that may not be how we're reading it. And so what keeps me up is misfiring and having that done down the road. So I think for me, what I'm trying to kind of assess as soon as the Joint Committee is established is really kind of that dialogue back and forth and information loop to make sure that if there are ambiguities in this, that we're correcting them, even if we need a legislative fix to do that.
And I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that we can do to help you is that link not only with the not yet stood up Joint Committee, but with legislators. And I think we've been craving that. And that's something, as commissioners, if there is something that we can do to help you, help Director Garrett, and make sure that we identify those misfires ahead of time. You don't want a hot gun sitting next to you. So if we can help you with that as you go through, and I really, really appreciate all that you've done, not just for us, but for the agency on trying to uncover and identify all of those items that could be misintent, because we don't want that. And I don't think the legislatures want that either. I think they would love to have put it all in, but you're right. We meant to do it this way, and we already know some of those are coming.
Right.
So, Leah, thank you very, very much for all that you've done.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you, and I don't know if this is put Carmen on the spot, but what's the timeline in which the governor has to sign the legislation?
Fine, fair question. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's the last day, and the governor will sign the bill tomorrow.
And might the governor have given any indication to you on her intent?
It is my expectation she will sign the bill.
And does the governor have any? Could she exercise any line item veto authority on this legislation?
I don't know on this particular. I think that's only for the
Revenue.
corporations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sure you're thinking about this too, but I'm a little worried about mismatched expectations, not just among legislators and the department, but also among our local partners in the department, because I think a lot of them had and have some very high hopes and are reading things into the bill, into the deliberations in the legislature that didn't end up really in the bill. And so I think that's going to be a challenge to manage as well.
And maybe that's a good opportunity for us to have a conversation with the ACT chairs and with folks in October to go through some of those pieces, kind of our take on how especially the Connect process will unfold. And I know there's a lot of angst about what that means. And if we are all sharing the same information, I think that will definitely benefit all of us. I appreciate you raising that. Please.
Oh, Madam Chair, we're on the front end of this, right? So I think it's pretty easy for us to be aligned going forward, right? They're going to have the joint committee. I think it's an opportunity for us to communicate with them on a regular basis, to have them before the commission as we begin to implement and execute the new law. So, I mean, I think on the front end, we have an opportunity to improve the connectivity between both where the governor wants to go, but also where the legislative intent going forward. And I don't know if there's an opportunity to include anyone there at the workshop to clarify some of that ambiguity on the letter of the law versus the legislative intent. But I think it's our intent to move forward in good faith and to execute as written and to try to clarify the intentions there moving forward. And I think to figure out when there's some conflict or some friction between legislative intent and how it's drafted, that we come up with workable solutions with kind of eyes wide open. But
I think that's an important piece.
yeah, I think we're at the front end of it, right? So that's the good news, is we have, it's wide open for us to work together with those who drafted this and clearly have ownership in the changes, in how they affect ODOT and how they affect the commission, in particular the new authorities and oversight given to the commission that they felt very strongly about, going back to the management review and what new transparencies were put in. But I mean, the onus is on us to make sure that we're connected and having clear vision on what the intent is, as well as the letter of the law.
I wholeheartedly agree. I wonder, Director Garrett, if we could talk offline in between now and the next meeting and see if there's a way for us to put that into the workshop as well. I think that would be great, because I think it really is setting the pace. And I think also getting from them what are their expectations, and where there were some questions in terms of the lines from the committee and the OTC and who has authority where. So I think it definitely would behoove us to start out very strong and understanding where those clear lines are, and so that we don't have questions down the road. Okay.
And then
Yes,
maybe you can sleep.
That'd be nice.
You have been amazing, and just couldn't be more proud to work with you. I heard time and again about the responsiveness, the level of detail, the commitment to just getting things right. Thank you to you and your team for shepherding all of this forward, and really proud to work with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda, we have a discussion about the charge and approval to form a value pricing policy advisory committee. Mr. Brower, turn it over to you. And in your packet, we do have a draft charge as well as the outline for the policy advisory committee.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, for the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director. And before we start, I have one important announcement. There is a white Ford Fusion outside, sedan, license plate E256524. Emily Nascimento has been texting me about every 15 seconds. They've asked us to move it 3 times, and so I think they're at the point where they may take some action on us here.
Does it have state plates on it?
It is, in fact, an E plate is a state plate, so. I think we found the owner. Okay. Excellent. All right, Emily, you see I did that? Thank you. The value pricing implementation is going to be one of the most interesting portions of the implementation of HB 2017, and potentially one of the most far-reaching and transformative. A little bit of background on value pricing. We had a discussion a couple months ago when Cambridge Systematics came in and gave you an overview of congestion pricing that sort of touched the high level of what this means and what the implications are. And we've shared a background paper that they had put together. We've done a number of little policy implementation or policy review work over a number of years, but this is a fairly recent conversation with this commission. I think Commissioner Lohman is probably the only one who was really around about half a decade ago when we really did in-depth work on that leading up to the I-5 Columbia River Crossing project. Value pricing is synonymous with congestion pricing, and is essentially an effort to use price signals through tolling to manage demand on the transportation system. Typically, it means that you're charging a higher price for use of a road or a portion of a road, perhaps just a lane, when demand is greater, usually in the evening or morning rush hours. The goal is really to reduce congestion, make more efficient use of the transportation system we have by encouraging people to travel at less congested times, or to provide a more reliable travel time for those who choose to pay. Value pricing, there's a number of different applications. For example, one of the most common is converting an existing carpool lane, a diamond lane, a high occupancy vehicle lane, to a high occupancy toll lane in which non-carpoolers can choose to pay a fee to use the lane to save time or have a more reliable trip. That's been done extensively across the country, and Washington has 2 of these hot lanes that they have put into place to great effect. There are also congestion pricing applications that involve putting a variable toll on a new highway lane. That can be called an express toll lane. It's very similar to a hot lane. Another very common method, and this is what we propose for the I-5 Columbia River crossing, is using tolls on bridges that vary by time of day. So for example, with the I-5 Columbia River crossing, that was going to be tolled around the clock, and yet there was going to be essentially a surcharge at peak hours to try to encourage people to drive at less congested times of the day. Another application that has not been used in the United States, but which has been used in a number of European and Asian cities, is cordon pricing, where you essentially draw a ring around a central business district and charge for most routes into that area. This has been done in London, Singapore, Stockholm, and I think there was one other city in Sweden which have deployed this to great effect. All of these value pricing applications serve different goals. So, for example, variable bridge tolls can be used to shift traffic to less congested times of the day, or to finance existing or expanded highway capacity, like the Columbia River crossing would have done. Hot lanes generally do not necessarily manage demand or shift demand to non-peak periods as much, but they do provide a more reliable trip for those who wish to pay. Cordon pricing is one that is often used as a demand management tool, really to try to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles on the road, shift demand to transit oftentimes. So really, those are the different outcomes you can facilitate or incentivize using value pricing. And what's interesting about this legislation is that it clearly defines that congestion relief is the goal, but it doesn't specifically direct the commission on how to go about that. So there's really a policy call for the commission in this legislation about what application you will choose and how that will facilitate congestion relief. The specific direction in the bill is that in order to manage congestion, under Section 120, you're required to develop a proposal for value pricing on Interstate 5 and Interstate 205 from the Columbia River to the junction of those 2 highways. You have to apply to the Federal Highway Administration for approval to implement value pricing no later than December 31st, 2018. And then if FHWA approves, you're directed to implement value pricing as they approve. So we are working on implementing this direction from the legislature on 2 fronts. The first is what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today, is the value pricing feasibility analysis in the Portland metro region, where we're going to work with stakeholders to determine where to apply value pricing and what specific form of value pricing to apply. That's really going to be handled by Region 1 staff as essentially a regional transportation project. The second piece is really the policy and systems development work that will proceed apace with the feasibility analysis. This is going to be about how we collect the tolls. That will include developing plans for the on-highway lane systems, the customer service systems, the billing systems, that entire back office and the organizational structure by which ODOT implements this. Likely, we will have to stand up some sort of new unit within ODOT. That will be a toll unit. For example, Washington has a toll division within WashDOT. We'll make a determination through this process about how you would stand that up. Most likely, we will procure a significant amount of this service from the private sector, as there are already vendors who provide these lane systems and back office support and customer service support. So it will be almost a public-private partnership in that sense. That work on systems and policy will be led out of our Office of Innovation within the Director's Office, which also has authority over automated vehicles and road usage charging and other sort of innovative policy work. They'll be standing up that effort and then transferring it to a new unit within ODOT once that is stood up. But they're a good unit to do that policy development work. They'll be doing some policy, statewide policy work related to various aspects that we'll need to implement this. For example, we will likely need to update our toll enforcement statutes, as those are were last updated in 2007. There's been a lot of technological change, a lot of understanding of how most effectively to enforce tolls. So we'll need to go through that process and determine if there's ways to go about doing that. There'll also be other policy decisions that the Commission will need to weigh in on that the Office of Innovation will lead. So I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about the Value Pricing Policy Advisory Committee, which we're proposing as a stakeholder group that can help inform the Commission's decision-making on the actual transportation project side of this, where and what form of value pricing. Next month, it's likely that you may get a proposal that we'd like to put some additional investment into around the how, what sort of system we're going to build here. We're looking at the opportunity to build an open architecture tolling system that would be less beholden to a single technology, a more customer-centric, customer-friendly approach that you could bring multiple devices or multiple accounts. If you were in Origo, you might be able to use your Origo account to pay your tolls, or you might be able to use your OnStar or in-car telematics or a transponder. So we're looking at that as an opportunity because unlike a lot of states that are legacy systems that have had tolling for decades, we're coming into this at a really interesting time for technology as cars become essentially mobile computers, and trying to leverage some of that opportunity as well. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that next month if we're seeing opportunities panning out with a request for information that we put on the street recently. So to focus
Quick question.
yes.
Quick question. So Region 1, did I understand you correctly? They will be talking about whether it is feasible or not, and
Yes.
this is going to be more the implementation of options of the how.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct, Chairman.
And so what level of interaction will we have? My concern is with Region 1, making sure, I don't know that the question is, should we, it's can we? And so how do we make sure that we are guiding that in a direction that, just knowing that this is a very politically charged, challenging discussion for a number of individuals. So I'm just wondering what that looks like.
Yeah, Chair Boehne, that's a really good question. I think it's really important for the Commission's fingerprints to be all over this. And that's why with this Policy Advisory Committee, we are requesting that we have a member of the Commission serve on this and help direct that regular activity of this group. We would also expect that this is going to be an item you will probably see on your agenda more often than you would like. We anticipate monthly updates through the fall, and I believe that document we handed out as part of the lunch packet lists regular updates once this Policy Advisory Committee gets up and running. That you'll probably have that on either monthly or every couple of months, so that you can be informed, provide feedback, and provide any direction, and really to help your decision making in the long term. We anticipate that this work for the Policy Advisory Committee will take much of the next year. And that there will be at some point in the spring or summer of next year a recommendation coming to the Commission or input coming to the Commission for you then to make some decisions so that we can prepare that application to FHWA. So you will get plenty of opportunity to be engaged in this one, as this is, again, one of the, when Commissioner Brown asked Leah the question, what keeps you up at night? This is certainly one that may not facilitate me sleeping deeply over the next year or two.
Just a quick question, and I realize this is tied to two specific corridors within Region 1.
Yep.
And because I see this maybe moving further south one of these days, could we title this, instead of just value pricing implementation, can we be a little more specific? Value pricing on I-5 and the 205 corridor within, I say that only because we might want to change it later on. Okay. And if we have an all-encompassing value pricing, it's going to be harder to change. Is that something that I'm being a little too specific on? And I ask fellow commissioners to weigh in and just because I think, we're doing this and it's kind of a, let's see if it works. And we're picking 2 specific places. So I'd like the Policy Advisory Committee and this tolling to be specific. Thoughts?
My only hesitation would be that we develop something that only works in one area. So long as whatever it is that we decide are options, we're not creating a challenge down the future to replicate. So that.
And I think that we're saying the same thing,
Excellent.
just in a different way.
Okay. So thoughts?
But just to clarify, the legislation highlights specific areas where we are to look to implement value pricing.
We are to be very focused.
Right, so
correct.
it's not, it doesn't give us, it doesn't say we can't have a statewide lens,
Right.
but it does charge us to look at a very specific application.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. The legislation, Commissioner Holleran, specifically directs you to look at I-5 and I-205, but is permissive relating to value pricing anywhere else in the state. For the record, this is direction from the legislature. You already have statutory authority in ORS 383 to undertake tolling of the transportation system. And so this is consistent with that direction, just provides you a little bit of a push into making use of that existing statutory direction.
And a timeline that we need to meet as well. Please.
Thanks, Travis. I was when I was reading through this, and obviously, it was just identified, 205 as one of those corridors which we would be looking into. As it's funny, on my flight over, I was reading a report on just the income disparities in the Portland metro region and how the heavily concentrated populations of color that are living on incomes less than like 30,000 are heavily concentrated in East Portland, which 205 obviously runs adjacent to. So I was just, when I was looking through the attachment that was describing the membership, and one of the bullet points indicates advocates for equity and environmental justice, but then it has another bullet that indicates environmental advocacy groups. So it's almost redundant from the environmental side there. But then also, to be more specific, if we could target one of those bullet points around equity as and make it more socially equity focused, which would look at, more broadly as representatives and advocates from those communities that make up, human health impacts as it relates to transportation systems and then diversity and obviously low income populations. I think that conversation brought to the table for that advisory group will be very important as we look at this program, because in all honesty, I mean, we want to build support for what we're doing broadly amongst the taxpayers as opposed to resentment. And yeah, and then obviously the list that you have identified here of individuals, I think there would definitely need to be more outreach to people of color that could actually take up some of these positions on this committee.
Okay. Good points, Commissioner Simpson. And certainly the bullet point around equity and environmental justice is to try to get at that